What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Going Deep podcast. I'm Wes Pyatt, and I'm here with my friend Quinn. I have known Quinn for a very, very, very long time, but we haven't seen each other in a very, very, very long time. So it's so great to see you. We spent about 20 or 30 minutes before we even started just trying to catch up and see how life is and everything. I was laughing and saying she's more professional than I am at this podcast thing. She's got a really awesome background and everything. So Quinn, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to catch up.
So Quinn is a licensed therapist, and obviously on the Going Deep podcast, we like to go deep and talk about things that really we should be talking about with therapists. So it's great to have an actual therapist here to talk about these things. But one of the unique things about me and Quinn was that growing up, both of us grew up in not the best household environments, but both of us had no idea that we were going through that at the time. And I would like to talk to you a little bit, Quinn, about, maybe those years that we knew each other through, high school and stuff, and getting to know each other. And I guess the masks that we kind of wear as kids in order to just feel normal when we're around each other. Can you talk a little bit about like your childhood and your upbringing and what it was like to have to wear that mask every day as you walked out the door?
Yeah. So when my story starts, you told me earlier that you'd like written a memoir, and I'm like, how would I open like the story of my life? I was actually born on a marijuana farm in California. And my dad went to prison like very early on in my life. I think I was 2. My mom was a single mom. And so, like, she worked very hard, but there was a lot of like, I guess in the areas and the neighborhoods that I grew up in, there was just a lot of like exposure. And if you or anybody that's like listening has like grown up kind of like in the hood a little bit, I would say like they'll understand like a lot of the things that you're exposed to, especially if there's like drugs involved or violence or things like that. So, I just had a lot of exposure as a young kid to things that a kid should not be exposed to. My brother was very abusive. I mean, to the point where so my mom was a single mom, it's just she was always gone. And he would chase me around the house with knives, or he'd like tie me up and play dart practice with me with like metal darts. And I, I hope I'm not going too deep, like too fast.
No.
But there was that's the name of the podcast, right?
Yes, well, people have had similar experiences actually. So please keep going.
So, like by the time I was, I don't know, in middle school or high school, like multiple sexual assaults and again, a lot of like exposure to things that like things I couldn't imagine my kids going through. And later on, I found out that my brother ended up being schizophrenic and had so many like mental health issues, which brings a little more understanding to like why I was experiencing a lot of those things. But growing up, and I don't know if you felt this way, but like growing up in that type of environment and like growing up pretty poor and not having a lot of the things that like I saw my peers had. The mask that I wore was like not wanting people to see like the dysfunction of my family and the dysfunction of like where, what I was going through. So I would have people like if a friend dropped me off, I'd like have them drop me off like down the road, or like I didn't want someone to come over and like stay the night at my house. I didn't want them to like see the car that my mom or my grandparents drove. Just always wanting to have not having the cool clothes and things
Oh, you
that
always had the
like my
knockoff.
friends had. Yeah, I always had the knockoff. I always had to go to like Payless shoe stores and like
Big five.
get the cheap. Yeah, yeah, just like the cheap stuff. And like, I would try to like fake it in ways. So like I would save up money or like and I'd go like try to buy something that was like on brand, like the Vans or, the clothes that like looked cool, which is like, I don't know if you feel this way, but like with my kids now, they'll be like, my daughters will be like, I want Birkenstocks. Everybody has Birkenstocks. And I'm like, yeah, I want to buy you the Birkenstocks because I can, but it's like, I
That's
try to
fine.
balance that, like spoiling them and, because like my inner child is like, yes, let her have the cool clothes so she can like feel like she fits in because I didn't get to have that.
Yeah.
So that was like the mask that I wore. And then you and I met in college, and I was so excited to go to college because I felt like it was like an even playing field. Like everybody was poor because like no, college kid like has a lot of money. And so I felt like I could kind of like take a little bit of that mask off because everybody was just kind of like struggling to survive, like everybody at that point was living off of like top ramen and mac and cheese. And so I felt a little bit more of like that even field. And I also, when you grow up surrounded by so much like chaos and like I said, like kind of in like a low or socioeconomic neighborhood, everybody has trauma. Like everybody has this story of things that they've experienced because everybody's kind of like maybe not everybody, but most of the people that I was like close to in my neighborhoods and stuff all had, been molested or abused or, those kinds of things. And so you don't really feel like your story is like special, not special, but you don't feel like it's a big deal. You kind of like minimize it for yourself. And
Well,
so
that
I
was
didn't
actually
really like, what's
sorry,
that?
keep going. Sorry, please.
Oh, I was just saying that like I minimized it for myself because I was like, oh, like who cares if I was like raped when I was 11? So was so and so and so and so. It doesn't really matter. Like everybody has that story. And it wasn't till like I was in college and, started to talk to people that were of a different like social class than I was that I started to realize like, oh, this is not normal. Like not everybody experiences this kind of thing. 'Cause in the place where I'm from, I would share those experiences and everybody kind of had those same experiences. So it didn't feel different. But then I met people that like were from a, middle class or upper middle class. And I was like, oh, that didn't happen to you.
I think that was what was so tough for me and my sister growing up in San Luis Obispo was that it was always so right in front of our face how poor we were, how different we were, how messed up my mom was, how messed up our lives were because San Luis Obispo is a very affluent neighborhood. We just happened to be the Section 8 community within the affluent. Everybody's got a Section 8 part in
Yeah,
our
there's like
town.
one Section 8 community in San Luis Obispo is
That
very
was us.
affluent for sure.
We were there for sure, and it was like that's an interesting thing to think about of, growing up and I think about this quite a lot of I almost wish I had grown up in the ghetto. I almost wish I had grown up in all Section 8 housing in a sense so that there was some normalcy to what we were going through because it never felt normal growing up what we were going through and what was happening. It always felt like you would go on baseball trips because you were like me and my sister were pretty good athletes growing up. And so we got on good baseball teams, but then you got to drive to Bakersfield or Fresno or wherever, Arizona to do these tournaments. And we can't go. We don't have the money to stay at a hotel to drive. And like the one time that my mom did make it happen, it was the most embarrassing thing in the world. We had the horrible car that could barely make it there. We didn't have AC the whole time. It took us twice as long as everybody else to get there. We couldn't stay in the same hotel. We had to stay in a Motel 6 and everybody else was staying in the Hilton. And it was like, I almost didn't want to go, because you felt so poor. You felt so like bottom of the barrel. Shit, if I grew up in the ghetto and I looked at what we had, it would actually, people would have been mad at me for everything I had. They'd be like, you got hell? Like, you're going to play
Yeah.
baseball?
Well, and that's another side of it. That's another side of it is like the guilt that you feel is like that's another game you can play with yourself and that I did play with myself that my mom reminded me of because like we lived in a suburb of Sacramento, but she was from and like my grandma lived in like South Sacramento, which is like really really bad. Like drive-bys every day, but like we had only had one drive-by. And so like to my mom, we were living in like upper class. Like that was like no big deal. And like we only had two meth labs on our street as opposed to like, like so it was like,
My kids now are
yeah.
like, so is getting to go to this camp or do that or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you got a 70-foot trampoline in the backyard. You're in a, 1,200 square foot house. You're going to these. In my head, it's like this, well, you might as well be queens and kings around here. You know what I mean? Like compared to what we did, but you try not to play the comparison game.
Yeah, I try not to. We live like where we live now, we live in Niceville. Were you ever stationed at Eglin Air Force Base?
No, I got stuck at Travis and Vacaville my whole life, basically.
No. Well, it's called Niceville and it's legitimately like, it's like Pleasantville, like that movie. Like it's all super nice and,
Well,
It
it'd be
is
weird
pretty
if it wasn't.
affluent.
We called it
Yeah.
Niceville, and it was like
It was very
a
it's near Destin, Florida. I don't know if you've ever
okay.
been to Destin, but
No, but I know
it's
England
a
Air Force
very
Base.
nice area. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and the kids are like, I'm like, we live in like a new home and you have like the stuff and like to me, I'm like, can you imagine? And they actually got to experience like going back to where I was from like a few months ago. And like I took them to South Sacramento and they were like my daughter was like hiding inside. She was like, you grew up here? And there's like helicopters like, do not come outside of your house. Cause like, they're like spotlighting,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
trying to like
yeah.
follow
We're SWAT. We're
and the
trying to
kids are, like, inside, like, so terrified, and I was like, "It'll be fine, like, you guys are okay," but I'm really thankful that they got to experience, like, seeing where 'cause it doesn't mean enough to, like, tell them, like, if they've never experienced any of that, they have 0 context of, like, what that even means. They don't know.
yeah, they don't know. Yeah, that how was that? That must have been so powerful for you.
To go back and, like, bring them back?
Everything about that whole thing. I mean, going back in general, number 1 is always hard when you're going back to a traumatic environment, so that's number 1, but then you're bringing your kids into that environment, and I'm sure that's gotta be tugging at you in both ways.
Yeah, it was I mean, the house so I went back both of my grandmas had a stroke this year, which was, like, kinda crazy, like, at the same time, so and one of them, I had to, like, help her move out of her house, which was the house she lived at actually with my brother and my dad, um, and my brother passed away in that home in 2021 of a heroin overdose, and my dad passed away of a fentanyl overdose in that home in 2023. Going back to that house and clearing that house and, like, finding needles everywhere and, like, all of that stuff was, like it was a crazy experience, like, just to go back there and the kids, like, obviously, they weren't, like, touching anything, we made sure everything was, like, safe. They weren't moving stuff, but they got to, like, go in there and see, like, where my grandmother had lived and, where, my grandma's still alive, by the way, she just turned 91. We moved her back here to Florida. I was like, "You're coming with me now."
Brilliant.
But yeah, she's so awesome. But my kids got to, like, see what I grew up in, and they were just like, "Wow," like, "You've shared some stories about your life experience," and I think that they, like, understood. They just had a different level of, like, understanding and appreciation for what they have now, which is, like, the best we can hope as parents. Because like, I try to tell them, like, "You have an Owala water bottle and Birkenstocks and, like, you have, like, the new clothes, like, all your clothes are new, like, none of them are hand-me-downs, none of them are from Goodwill, like, you fit in with your friend like, I drive a new car, it doesn't pop and sputter and squeak every single time I pull up to the anything.
You know
Like, that was
you know
so I remember how embarrassing that was.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
worst. If anything that had to do with transportation was a nightmare,
Mm-mm.
I remember that. Like, that is something I'm really proud of, though, was how much trust, or I guess you can call it trust, it was more like just whatever go, that my
Yeah,
mom put in.
yeah, negligence.
Yeah, of just like I knew how to take city buses. I knew how to transfer city buses. I knew how to get from point A to point B. I knew how to stay away from certain people, how to ask other people for help and stuff. And there's just this, it really helped me in my adult life when I'm traveling around on the seminar staff, going to countries and new states and new cities and new people and new hotel rooms that I don't know anybody, and having to get, rental cars and go to these places. It was just like, for me, it was like, cool, let's do it. This is awesome. Like, I got no problem doing this. And I remember some of my other counterparts really struggling with that. Like, well, where do we go? What do we do? And hold on, wait for me. And I don't know. I got to get this. And it was just like, wow, I guess traumatic things can actually help you out when you get older. Have
Yeah,
you?
well, you become resilient, like, you just
Yeah,
really you have
definitely.
to figure it out. When you parented yourself your whole life, I mean, you kinda become an expert
Well, and
at
it's
life.
tough, like, I think now with being parents and trying to find that middle ground between, not being a helicopter parent, but also giving our kids the reins that they need to figure things out on their own. Now, your kids have been through something that most kids will never have to go through, with the passing of their father, and the way especially that it happened. I don't know how much they know about what happened and the situations, but I'd like to take an even bigger step back from there and ask you, prior to meeting Andy and prior to him going on all these deployments, was there an Andy before, and was there a serious progression that you saw to an Andy after?
When he and I first met
Yeah, like there had to
through
be
the
something like,
deployments.
This is it. This is the one. This is the human that I'm going to be with. I'm going to have, look, I'm going to give, and then like,
Have you heard of love bombing? No, just kidding.
yeah, I'm just imagining like war changes people. It doesn't, and yes, there are people that are, you're just that person, and then war makes you kind of worse of that person, I guess, in a sense, but most of the people I know, it's like, man, it really changed them a lot. And I was just curious if you saw that in him at all.
Yeah, we met after he had already had one deployment to Afghanistan that what I believe was 15 months. So he was like regular infantry in the army and like did all the, you know,
You know, I've been
Afghanistan
through that
stuff.
quite a
Like,
bit.
yeah, he'd already been to combat as like a private and done that whole thing. So we met when he was like home on leave. And, he did the typical like military thing, like proposed to me like within a week, like that whole experience. What's that?
It was a lot really fast in terms of the
Yeah,
relationship.
very, very, very quick. We got married 3 weeks after we met. Like I flew out to North Carolina to visit and we got married. Yeah. Oh, it was fast. It was a very, very fast.
This
Yeah.
changes things.
Yeah. Yeah. So we spent I wanna say so from like January to August, so that's what, 8 months together, before he went on another year deployment. So then he was gone again for a year. And I would say like I'd never met him prior to him having any combat experience. So I already met him like post his first deployment. So I couldn't really speak to like what he was like. I mean, you knew him before I knew him.
Yeah, say like, I mean, we called him Army Andy growing up because his whole goal was to do exactly what he did. Bottom line, like he
Yeah,
had it all laid out. That's
yeah.
what he was going to do. That's who he was going to be. He was going to go through infantry. He was going to go through Green Berets. He was going to become Delta Force. Like that was his goal. And yeah, man,
Mhm.
talk about, he definitely did it.
Yeah, he did. So he went 8 months after knowing him, but I would say, like, in that 8 months, the first 8 months of our marriage, like, there was already, like, a lot of intensity, a lot of intense anger, punching holes in walls. I remember our apartment was, like, a single bedroom apartment, and so, like, if you're in the living room, like, you can see the door to the bedroom, and I remember he'd, like, punched a hole through the door because it was, like, some cheapo door. And I remember, like, sitting on the couch and, like, seeing through the door, like, kinda, like, looking through it and, like, I was like, "What the fuck is this?" Like, I hope I can cuss on this podcast, but I was
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah. We're going to see.
I was like I was like, "What the fuck am I doing?" I remember, like, kinda trying to, like, beat one of my, like, coping mechanisms is humor, so I remember, like, poking my head through the door and, like, trying to, like, make light of it, but it really was pretty messed up that, like, we were only a few months into being together and married, and, like, there was already holes in the walls. I was already scared. I was already, fearful, but there was a lot of me staying in the relationship because of kind of one of those pressures of being like a military spouse of, oh, you're going to leave me before I go on a deployment, or you're going to leave me while I'm on a deployment, or you're going to leave me right when I get back from a deployment. And so
Just the entire career that we had, there was
the
no,
entire, there
it
was
was
no time that
gone. Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah,
It
so there
was
was no time, but I wasn't thinking that then. I was just trying to like be a good wife. I was just like, okay, well, this is what I do is I endure and I support him and I'm there for him and I'm there before, during, and after all these spaces, which is essentially all of our time. And then, so there was definitely like a progression of like mental health issues, but I would say like the intent, like the anger was there always. But it like and it kinda, I guess I would say it ebbed and flowed, like I went through darker times if he was, like, drinking, if he was, like, drinking a lot, that was really bad when he would be drinking more naturally, right? Yeah, and so or if he was, like, upset about a selection or something else that had happened, it would get
honestly
worse, and
probably anything that went against what he wanted, right? Yeah, like, I remember going through those feelings as well, and I still do, of just, like, really, it's a way to protect yourself. You're trying to protect yourself from something, so you'd be big tough guy, right, and get angry about it, but really, it's like, because we're so out of control, it's the only thing we can control, so let's just be angry and be in control.
Mhm.
But you decided to take control, and you left.
Yeah, so that was we spent 9 years together, 6 deployments. I don't even know how many selections because he went to Ranger School, he went to RASP 2, which is like the selection to go back to Ranger Battalion, and then he went to Delta selection, but they told him to go to SFAS. So then he went through SFAS and then he actually didn't make it the first time. So he went back. I mean, they talk about resilience. Like that is one thing I would never ever take away. Like he was persistent in his desires to achieve, went through SFAS again, and then went through the Q course, which is if anybody is affiliated with the Army or the military, you guys will understand that basically it's a lot of things.
It's
And
like
then going to
basically whole life being taken up by walking through woods, being cold, being
yeah, yeah, being starving, being sleep deprived, all that stuff. So then, 6 deployments. I don't even know how many selections and schools and 3 kids. We had 3 children together. And you know, there was a lot of abuse that happened during that time that
so
most of
sorry.
it emotional, psychological, stuff. And it didn't help that he was in special forces, which they become trained in psychological warfare. And so I didn't recognize then how much that was likely weaponized like in the relationship because I didn't understand, you know, psychological warfare type stuff. So I ended up
Why would
leaving.
you with your
Why would any normal human understand psychological warfare? So I left in 2017.
so you decide to leave, obviously it's tough, and then he decides to take his life. How long after you guys separated?
We got divorced. So we separated in 2017, divorced 2018.
Uh-huh.
And he met his wife. So he actually remarried. I don't know if you knew this. He remarried um, and moved up to Washington, D.C. And he was remarried for, I think, 7 months. And he died by suicide in July, actually, 5 years ago today, July 7th, 2020 was
Which is
when
so insane that we decided to do this podcast on that day, by the way. It was not
it
planned at
is
all.
crazy. Not planned. No, no. So yeah, so that's what happened. He actually shot himself in front of his wife, his new wife, which was something that like he had threatened to do. Like that was something that kept me in the relationship for a very long time. I mean, he would load a pistol and he
So
would hold
that's
it to his head
psychological warfare
and he
you're
would
talking
be like, "What's that?"
that was some of the psychological warfare you're talking
Yeah. He would, he'd load a Glock and he'd put her right up to his head and he'd be like, "I'm gonna blow my brains out." And there was multiple times, like both in front of our children and alone, like that I had to wrestle the pistol in front of out of his hand. And one of the times we were at Disney World, that was the worst time. I was like, "Why are we doing this at Disney? I hate this place."
Yeah, it's just the trauma doesn't stay at home, right? It goes anywhere with you, for sure. And so sorry that you had to deal with any of that and that your kids had to deal with any of that and all of that stuff. It just is something nobody should ever have to deal with. And it's such a fucked up machine that we live in and that's pumping this kind of stuff out because of it. But another but in your story is that you've taken everything that has just been like to you and made something out of it. You've composted it all and you've become better because of it. Like you had this shit upbringing and you decide to go to college and make something of yourself and do something with it. You have this shit first marriage and you decide to get out of it and to move on and not let it crush you. And then he commits suicide and you decide to become a therapist. And now you're helping people. I can imagine in a way that nobody else can that has been through the things that you've been through. What the fuck gives you that resilience? Like, how do you have that? Where did that come from? What keeps you going, you know?
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot during my life, especially like, working with trauma survivors, right? Like I think about like, well, what did I have? What did I have that some people didn't get? And how could it, because I think about it in the way of like wanting to replicate that, right? Like, what did I
That's
have or
what,
do I have that allows me to have this level of resilience that I could then translate over, and maybe just my work itself is the translation, right? Like I get to like hold that space and facilitate like healing for other people that like didn't have that opportunity or weren't born with that or didn't get it in them. I knew that from a very young age. So despite being raised in a lot of like chaos and bad experiences, my grandfather was a very influential part of my life, and he was somebody that like raised me in like serving and loving others. That was like a big value system that he rooted in me from very very young age. And like we would volunteer, even though like we were probably getting some of the food from like the soup kitchens and stuff like that. Like we would volunteer there, so like we would, oh,
yeah, of
we
course.
there was always this idea that, like, somebody had it worse than me. Like,
Yeah,
yes, my life was
that's true.
hard, but I always knew it could be worse. I was like, it could be worse. Like, and my mom kind of reminded me, and like some people talk about this as like not a good thing to like tell your kids or like a way to like raise your kids. But I actually kind of disagree. I wasn't feeling grateful for something. Like my mom would be like, she would point out somebody maybe that was like in a wheelchair. She was like, both your legs work, both your arms work. You are like you are an able-bodied human. Like there things could be so much worse. And instead of going the negative way with that, like I really adapted this like great level of gratitude. Like I've always been incredibly grateful for everything that I have had because of that awareness. I've been like, yeah, yes, these shitty things are happening to me, but at least I'm not being raised in a war zone, or like at least I have food most of the days of my life, which is great, which is more than what some people have. So like I think that gratitude was like a big part of, my upbringing, is like always being grateful for everything that I had. And then like the value system of service and loving others. Like my grandfather left the not Latter-day Saints, the Jehovah's Witnesses. So he left the church, but he had a lot of like deeply instilled like religious teachings, and we weren't raised Christian at all. But like one thing he always reminded me of was Jesus taught us to love everyone. And so like that was a message I heard, like love everyone no matter what. And so like I had this deep love for humans and deep like value system of service to others. And so I kind of learned throughout my life that I was good with like connecting to people and talking. I was the kid that got like talked too much on my report card. But I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be some kind of helper. That's what I wanted to do.
And probably because of your grandpa.
Yeah, it was probably a lot because of him. And um, in when I was 17 years old, I was sexually assaulted again. And this time I ended up in the hospital. And I remember having a therapist that I met, and she was like one of the first like therapists that I'd ever seen regularly. And I was like, what do you do? Like, what's your title? And she was like, oh, I'm an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, which is like, a therapist, a licensed therapist. And I was like, I want to do what you do. That's like what I want to do. Cause like she was helping me to like feel better and work through my experience and like all of this trauma. Like it didn't matter in that moment that I'd experienced all this, because she was helping me to like be okay. And so that was like the time that I knew that I wanted to be a therapist. What's that?
It's like, so I had a moment when I was 5 where I rolled my big wheel through a bunch of rose bushes. My mom ran me down to the volunteer fire department and put me on the hood of the fire truck there. And I immediately just stopped crying because it was so cool to be surrounded by all these firefighters and all these guys. That my only look at men at that point had been in the Hell's Angels, where my dad had brought guys around and stuff, and I'd seen those as men, right? And all of a sudden I had this hero standing in front of me, and I wanted nothing else than to, from that moment on, than to be a firefighter. I wanted to be there when people needed me, and like they were there. Like, this is my hero. I'm gonna be that hero in the future. Like you're like, this is my hero. I'm gonna be you in the future and be somebody else's hero. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So while I was married to my ex-husband, I finished my bachelor's in psychology. I graduated when I was like 39 weeks pregnant with my youngest, with Madeline. And then when I got divorced, so I'd only had my bachelor's. I was a single mom, 3 kids, no job, no money. I had zero family support. And I was like, what am I going to do? I just knew I had to get out of the marriage.
I was gonna say that's
And
how
one of
you
my girlfriends,
right? Like when somebody is willing with no security underneath them to leave something, you know it needed to happen for sure.
yeah, I was like, I'll live in a cardboard box and eat out of a trash can. I don't care. Like that was the point I got to. And one of my girlfriends was like, put your big girl panties on and figure it out. And I was like, okay. And so like I just did that. And my way
And,
out, like
and so here I am doing that.
yeah, and so I what part of my way out was to go to grad school. I was like, "Well, I'll go get my master's in social work like I've been wanting to do." I borrowed student loans to supplement my income because I had some child support, and then I had, supplemented with student loans, and I drove Uber, and I cleaned condos, and I busted my butt to get through grad school, and, um yeah, and then I met my current husband who's awesome. But yeah, it was a struggle, but it was worth every second of it.
But I'm hearing it coming back to the roots is like this one man who just showed you that loving kindness was the way to lead no matter what situation you were in, right? Like, I'd love to know if you know anything about your grandpa's upbringing and what his parents were like, or your great grandparents were like. Do you know anything about
Oh,
them?
yeah. Yeah, so my grandfather was the oldest boy. I think he was the only boy. I think he only had sisters, and, like, he also grew up very poor. His dad was an alcoholic, and his dad died under mysterious circumstances when my grandfather was, like, 16 years old or 15 years old, and so he became the man of the house at a very young age, had to take care of he slept outside, and the girls and his mom, like, slept in the trailer, and so, like, that was kind of, like, the beginning of his life was just kinda crazy, like, he had to grow up very fast. What's that?
Selfless, just completely selfless.
Then his mom, I guess, like, remarried, and that's when the Jehovah's Witness thing came into play, and, like, they started going into that church and stuff like that, and he learned about, like he became a pacifist, so, like, he rejected violence and didn't believe in, like, fighting or anything like that, and so he refused the draft and actually got sent to prison as a conscientious objector because of, like he was a Jehovah's Witness, and I don't know if you know anything about that, but, like, they don't believe in war and all that kinda stuff.
Yeah, on as a Jehovah's Witness. We have
Yeah. So he eventually, like, left the church and all that stuff, but some of those parts, like, really stuck with him, and he was very convicted about very I think probably like this, the way I'm describing it, he sounds like this very, like, kind of meek man, but he was actually very manly. He was a carpenter by trade. He had this super deep, like, booming voice. Like, he could really command, people if he had wanted to. It wasn't a desire of his to, like, command or control anybody. Like, he always operated from a place of, like, love and kindness and compassion and was accepting to everybody all the time, always. Like, he would see a guy on the street, a homeless man or something, and he would, like, slip him $10 or try to get him some food. And, somebody else would be like, oh, he's just going to go buy alcohol. He's like, I don't care. Maybe he'll eat today because of me. Like it didn't matter. It was just showing kindness and love always.
Do you know if he would I mean, you said he was Jehovah's Witness at first, but did he convert to anything else after, or did he just stay a pacifist?
No, he did not. He loved, like, religious history. He would talk to me about, like, history in general. So he would talk to me about, like, Greek and Roman history, and I got to grow up in this, like I grew up with my mom, but, like, I would spend a lot of time with him because my brother, like I said, was really abusive. Like, when I had to leave the house, I would go and stay at their place, and he would tell me, stories, and we'd read history books. And so I got to grow up with what I feel like are I'm not a Christian, but what I feel like is like the greatest message of Christianity, which is to love everybody. Like that to me was the message.
I was like sounds like he was studying Buddhism in a sense, like, I've taken up Buddhism over the last 5 years, and, like, one of the tenets is loving kindness, like, you gotta lead with loving
Mhm.
kindness,
Well, and when
pacifism.
when he was in prison, he read a lot of books. So, like, that was part of where he got his education because he didn't get to be educated throughout. Like, he didn't go to high school or anything like that because he was working and taking care of his family. And so, actually, when he went to prison, he got to read a lot. And that was when he, like, educated himself on, he did read about, like, Buddhism and different religions and stuff like that. So, he was a cool guy. He was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a little bit, you're into fitness and I'm into fitness, and you do CrossFit and I do CrossFit. What made you get into CrossFit, and when did you find it?
So, I found, I don't know if you know this story. Do you know how I got into CrossFit? I
Ready to
guess
hear
not.
it.
Yeah, you're ready. Okay. So I was working at, was it, what was that gym? Club 21? What was that gym
Oh,
that
it's
like
what?
named? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the one over by Cal Poly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was working there as a, I was kind of, I got into like lifting and stuff. I used to do rowing in high school. And so I was like an athlete. And then I, moved to slow, and I was working as like or working at a gym, just like as a general fitness trainer. I was like 18, 19. And I noticed the pit had like the pit is the MMA gym. They had a like adjunct gym in slow, like a kickboxing gym. And so I remember like leaving the regular gym and like seeing that MMA gym. And I was like, oh, I want to try MMA. That looks fun. Let's do kickboxing. So I started like doing kickboxing and things like that. And that was where I met a UFC fighter, Glover.
Oh, that's
And
right.
so I met
Okay.
Glover there. And so one day after a kickboxing workout, he was like, hey, do this workout. He goes, it's 21-15-9 pull-ups and thrusters. And I was like, he's like, my first workout was Fran. I didn't know what Fran was. I didn't know, but I had just finished a workout and I was like, sure, I'll do this where it sounds easy.
Yeah, right.
I was like, all the confidence. I was like, sure, 21-15-9, no big deal. Do the workout. My vision starts to like narrow, like I'm about to like black out. And I remember going into like the back room, I'm like convulsing and like laying on the ground, and it's cold like linoleum.
Worse too as the time
It's
goes
getting
on.
worse.
Getting better.
Yes, it's so bad. It's so bad. And I like simultaneously feeling like, I think I'm gonna die. What was that? I want to do that again. And I don't know, maybe that's like, that's how I'm sick in the head, is like, what just did that to me? I want to keep doing that. And so then I met John Hackelman and the owner of the pit, and like Chuck Liddell and like that whole crew. And they kind of like took me in a little bit. And John was like, I want you to do a mixture of MMA and CrossFit. I'm going to send you to this certification. And this was in 2007, I think. He's like, I'm going to send you this CrossFit certification in San Diego. I like drove down to San Diego. I took I slept in my car because I didn't have anywhere to stay. And it was like the kind of the middle of the desert. And I just like fell in love. I just fell in love with CrossFit. I was like, this is so hard and so good. Like, I just loved every minute of it. And I think I like realize now um that like there was part of me that like wanted to be really strong, like build up my strength so that like nobody could hurt me, or I could protect myself. There was just definitely like an aspect of like being able to hold my own.
I remember joining my first CrossFit gym and realizing that it was the first time I had been around a group of people that were that to get after it, or that type A, or that like just crushing life. It felt like
Competitive.
everybody
Yeah.
that was in there was crushing life in some way or another and just getting after it. And I didn't feel like I'd been around people like that. And it just like made me want to be better, made me want to get a better job or to find a better, whatever it was. Is that where you met your current husband?
We did. We met at the gym. And I think like all of my friends, I would say majority of my friends I've met in the gym, in my gym communities, and like the closest people I've had in my life, because they have that same mentality of like just wanting to work really hard. They're like, no excuses. Like, I'm just going to push it. And even like some of the nicest, like sweetest people, like 3, 2, 1, go, they're like so competitive. And I love that like fiery spirit in them, that like, even though they're like, maybe they're not doing the same weight or the same movement or whatever it is, like they're still competing with everybody else and with themselves. Like, I love that competitive, fun energy that like people who go into CrossFit carry around.
And is that what you kinda saw in your husband from across the room, or
Well, he knew he had a friend who knew who I was, who, like, knew that I worked out here, and he was new into CrossFit, and I was very, like, gun shy because I was newly divorced. I'd only been divorced for about a year, and, I was kinda, like, scared of other people. Yeah,
Exactly.
I was dating, not gonna lie, I was definitely dating, but I don't know if I was, like, wanting to be with anybody seriously, and so he came into the gym, and it wasn't he is very competitive, but that wasn't like, to a, like, sometimes negative degree that he's like, "I gotta tone it down." Like, he's an athlete, he, like, played basketball and did track, and he was a decathlete, and, he's, like, super like, he's almost not human, like, how athletic he is just naturally, but it really wasn't I loved the competitive side of him, and I loved that, like, he was an athlete and really liked to work out because that was a huge passion of mine, but what really kind of, like, drew me to him was the gym that I coached at the time was a co-op, so, like, we volunteer coached, it was on base, so, like, everybody who worked there volunteered. We cleaned the gym, we maintained the gym, and it was really my sanctuary, and I loved that space. Like, it was a sacred space for me, and when he saw how much the gym meant to me, he started loving on the gym. So, like, he would come in and he would mop the floors, and he would come in and he would, like, tighten the bolts on things, and, like, he's very handy, so he would, like, fix a rack that was broken or rehang the straps on the rings or
You're
just
seeing
anything.
every little one of these things that he's doing, aren't you?
And so I was like, "Hmm." Like, I was
Oh,
seeing
look at that
how.
selfless man over there.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, okay, I like that." So it was like through those actions, like when I started to see how he loved the gym because I loved the gym, and he did care about it, but it was really because I cared about it that, like, that really showed me, like, who he was. Like, everything that he did was in action, it wasn't in word.
So, how is he and I'm assuming that there has to be some sort of a conscious effort to not marry another one like the last one, in a sense.
Mm.
But I'm sure that there are pieces of everybody that we see in everybody, right? There's gotta be moments, like you just said right now, like he's really competitive, almost to a negative degree sometimes. And so you can almost go like, oh, there's a little bit of what I don't like, right? How do you keep yourself from seeing him in a negative light? Not because of things that he may be doing, but because of things that he may be reminding you of things that maybe have happened in your past. And this is not just from your time with Andy, but this could be also from your childhood as well.
One thing that's been really important because I didn't realize after coming out of that abusive marriage how much healing I needed to do because I hadn't yet at that time, like, gone to therapy, spent time, like, really working on myself. I'd seen therapists, like, here and there, but I hadn't, like, been in there. I hadn't committed, done the work, like, done the deeper level, like, trauma work. So I started to discover in my relationship with him, like, pretty early on, that I had a lot of, like, negative behaviors that I had adapted in unhealthy relationships and a lot of triggers that I had adapted in unhealthy relationships. And my goodness, like, he's such a saint. Like, he really is. Like, and everybody that knows him is like, yeah, he really is, like, such a great person. He was so secure and so, like, regulated. Like, he doesn't have a trauma history or anything. So, like, he was able to, like, hold a lot of space for
Right?
me.
Like he's just like everything has been okay.
Yeah, he's like, "Fine." And he has been through hard stuff, but he's, like, weirdly not traumatized by it, at least not till I've tried to dig. The therapist in me is like, "So, but what about do you have any repressed memories?" Yeah, but, like, I say that, like, he put me in timeout at one time, like, he broke up with me early on in the relationship because he was like, "You can have these triggers," and he didn't I'm paraphrasing, he was like, "You can have these triggers and, like, have these, feelings and all of this stuff, but, like, you can't take it out on me like
And that's what I
this."
was kind of getting at, right? Is like I have a ton of triggers that, that, especially now raising the kids, like this is when most of my trauma was during these ages. So it's coming back out. And I'm seeing all of it and I'm feeling all of it. And I get triggered all the time. And unfortunately, a lot of those times, that Meg absorbs a lot of that, in a sense of just my like frustration with the situation or whatever it may be, and I work my ass off to try to see those coming and to try to stop myself from getting there in the first place and to meditate and to eat well and to see my and to do all of the things, and I would imagine going through the schooling that you've gone through that has to help in some way, right? To be like, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, even though this is what you're feeling. But I would think that that could also be almost a negative in a sense too, where you just want to be blissfully dumb so that you can be triggered and be an animal and allow it to just, in a sense, like, do you ever get to that
Yeah.
point
Well,
where you just,
I think it depends on like what system you operate from. And that's like, this is a thing I talk a lot about because now I work in abuse recovery with women who are living in abusive relationships. And it is,
it's got to be so awful to deal with that all the time.
yeah. Well, I really love and am passionate about the work, but something that like comes up often is like they will say these things like, "Well, he has all this trauma or he has PTSD or he has mental illness." And I'm like, "Okay, that's like those are all things that are very like understandable, but that doesn't cause abusive behavior. What causes abusive behavior is if you're operating from a value system that allows you to engage in abusive behavior." So when I was with when that interaction happened where Anthony, my current husband, was like, "You can have these triggers and you can have these feelings, but you can't take it out on me in this way." And I wasn't like yelling or attacking him. It was mostly like I would get very anxious in the relationship and like interrogate him about like what he was doing or where he was going, which is not healthy, right? And
Yeah.
so he like really set his foot down and was like, you can have these anxieties in our relationship. Like you can have these triggers that like come up for you, but like you cannot handle them in this way." And I was like, so I didn't initially accept that. I was like, fuck you, blah, 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 like
Yeah.
reacted in a very like trauma way, but then like came back and was like, okay, I'm going to do the work on myself and like I'm going to work through these things so that like I'm not bringing this into the relationship. And so to kind of like bring that back to, I didn't allow the things that I had been through to validate or excuse any of my negative behaviors that it would negatively affect another human. And so, because I don't operate from a value system that thinks that that's okay to engage with my partner in that way, and not that like on the surface people are saying like, "Oh, I believe it's okay to like yell at my spouse." Like on the surface people will be like, "I know it's wrong to yell at my spouse." But if you're repeating that behavior over years and years of time, there is a part of your value system, I would say, that believes that that's okay because you continue to exhibit that, because you continue to engage in that behavior,
So
if that
what I
makes
hear you
sense.
saying is that you really have taken the time to sit down and ask yourself, what core values do I want to have and who do I want to be? And then when those triggers come up, you're kind of referring back to those in a sense. And you're like, hold on a second, am I aligning with my core values here? If I do X, Y, and Z, that means that you have to create some space there, right? Like you have to have the trigger, be able to create the space to recognize that you're being triggered and then be able to respond in that way that you're looking to do it, which, a lot of people don't have that wherewithal or the understanding that's even happening. Coming from a professional, do you have any tips for people like when they're just stuck in that, and they need to pull themselves out of it?
So go to therapy. So I like like really, I know that. So, or a life coach. I do lots of like life coaching now. I think there's excellent resources out there, like tons of like different modalities. But like if you're just talking about from like a nervous system perspective, like your nervous system is becoming triggered and then you're responding or reacting, right? If that's what you're referring to, then you need to figure out how to regulate and heal yourself. And that's your responsibility. Like, yes, it's not, you didn't ask for what happened to you, but it is your responsibility to heal from those things so that you don't inflict harm on other people. Trauma doesn't excuse harming others. And I think that that is something that like needs to, that saying hurt people. I'm like that it feels excused. I don't think it's untrue. I just feel like it removes accountability from the victim. right? Like it removes accountability, like, oh, I need to excuse their behavior from me because they're in pain, you know? And maybe like we can have some space for people, maybe one time or two times that happens, but like repeatedly over years and years, like not great. But to, anyways, go back to your question, like there are some amazing healing modalities that are out there right now. I don't know what you did in therapy, but I do what's called brain spotting, which is like a kind of an offshoot of EMDR therapy, but it is a magical therapy technique that I do. Have you heard of it?
I haven't heard of brain spotting. No, I've heard of EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, a bunch of other stuff, but not this. Can you walk us through it?
Yeah. So the guy who created it was an EMDR practitioner, and he discovered that he could reach the same outcomes instead of using bilateral stimulation, which is what is used in EMDR with the eye movement. He could reach the same outcomes by using spots within your visual range. So, and he kind of discovered this on accident, but he used to work with athletes and he was working with a ice skater who was like trying to get like the triple axel. This was like many years ago. And he noticed that while he was processing with her doing EMDR, that when she hit a certain point in the processing of the eye movement, her eye would do this little twitch. So he noticed this facial reflex that she was experiencing. And he was, he thought to himself, like, I'm going to go, off the grid here and see what I can do. And he was like, I just want you to hold your eye at this spot. And he held her there for, 30 minutes or so. And then the next day she hit her triple axel. And he was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm on to something. Over time, he perfected and developed this technique. And we believe that it is so effective in processing trauma and like healing the nervous system because your eyes are directly connected to your brain through the optic nerve. And
So
so
you don't have that
we
relation.
believe yeah, so we believe that when you move your eyes to a certain position, and there's a whole kind of setup to it, it's a little bit more in depth in the session. But when you move your eyes to a certain position while you're in kind of a certain processing state or in a certain activated state, you can have access to that trauma by looking at a certain place within your visual range.
Triggering different parts of the brain depending on where you're looking, basically. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense.
Yeah.
You can turn your toe this way or that way, and it'll totally trigger different muscles, right? Like that makes sense completely that that would happen. So and are there certain spots that you're supposed to look at for different traumas, or is it just you like everybody's different? There's a spectrum you gotta kind of work around.
Everybody is different and every processing session is different. So like, if I have somebody access and activated in a certain, thing that they want to process on, and then I walk them through finding the brain spot, it might be up and over to the left. And then the next week it might be straight in front of them. And sometimes it moves during the session depending on how we're processing. And so I used to do EMDR. That was what I was originally trained in because I knew I wanted to work in trauma. And then I had a colleague who was like, you have to do brain spotting. And she was somebody that I very much like love and trust. And I was like, okay, you got it. I'll do it. And I started doing brain spotting as a client and started learning how to do it as a practitioner as well, and it was very transformational for me. Like I went from a person who lived in anxiety, I'm just like high functioning anxiety every day, to like I don't even experience anxiety on a daily basis anymore, which if you would have told me that like 4 years ago, I would have been like, you're crazy, you can't get rid of anxiety, there's no way. But now I don't experience it. Yeah. So like I'm a believer for myself, and then like I have my clients like, well, we do this like deep level brain spotting processing, and they'll come back to me the next week. They're like, I'm not having that problem anymore.
Crazy.
Okay.
Crazy.
That
Well, I
problem
love
that
it.
you had
I
for
love
30 years.
I love all of these things, whether it be EMDR or this brain spotting stuff, because it's such based in reality. It's not a woo woo thing. It's not a, hey, we're going to get you to feel your energy shift from this chakra to this one. It's like we're moving your eyes to this area because it triggers this part of the brain. When you trigger this part of the brain, and I feel like more people would be bought into that, more people would be willing to do it. That's what you're looking for is like, what's the lowest barrier to entry where I can get the most buy in for people to do something that's going to change their lives? And it's like, I love that you've not only been through this stuff yourself, and have experienced either the good or negative outcomes of it. But now, because you've been through it and seen the positive outcomes of it, the way in which you do it as a practitioner is going to come from such a better place than somebody has never been through it, never done it, never seen it, but has seen it work. It's so much more powerful from somebody who's actually been through it. So that's huge.
Is. And I
And I
think
don't
that
want
as
to
a
keep
like,
you.
okay, traumas that I have been through, and I have so much gratitude for that. I know it's probably going to sound really weird for some people, but I have so much gratitude for it because it allows me to hold and facilitate space for other people's healing that I would not have the understanding that I have to be able to like facilitate that for them. Like I know some of these things that they're experiencing so deeply that I can, like, be there for them in this way.
That's so awesome. And I'm sure you just heard the doorbell in the background too.
Good. It's
I know.
time to go.
I think it is time to go. Quinn, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I would love to do this again in the future because I have so many more questions I want to ask you, and just catch up again would be awesome. But don't take off when I say goodbye. We'll try to get this thing uploaded. But thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah.